Sup, chooms, how y'all living? Hope everything is Nova and you're all having a preem week. So, one question I get all the time is, but Kevin, I've been on finasteride for like a month now, and not only is it not working, but I'm shedding more and I'm losing ground. What's going on, bro? You said that these treatments were supposed to work. This type of question is based on a very, very common misconception about how hair loss drugs work. Now, I've done videos on why shedding happens with hair loss drugs and how quickly drugs like finasteride and dutasteride start lowering DHT levels. But those videos don't really answer some more general questions like, how quickly am I going to see results when I start a hair loss drug? How long should I give a medication before I decide if it's working or if it's not working? When should I give up on a drug and decide to either change the dose or even change the drug routine entirely? These are all practical question, chooms, and there is some science behind the answer to these questions. So let's go ahead and employ some hair loss witchery and take a balls deep dive into the question of how long it takes for hair loss drugs to start showing results. First of all, there are three factors that you have to understand in order to better understand just how long it takes for a hair loss treatment to work. First, you have to understand how quickly these drugs work. Second, you have to understand how the hair cycle works. And finally, third, you have to understand how the drugs affect the hair cycle. I've gone over some parts of this in previous videos that I'll link below, but I thought a video putting this all together would be useful to you, my fellow hair loss witchers. So to best explain this, you should all know that there's a concept in chemistry that also applies to any mechanistic process, which is called the rate-limiting step. What that means is that in any process where there is a series of steps, how long the process takes is determined mostly by the slowest step. This rate-limiting step is like a bottleneck that slows down the whole process. People talk about rate-limiting steps in chemistry where there may be one step in a chemical reaction that slows everything down. The same thing can occur in biology where one step in a series of enzymatic reactions determines the overall speed of the reaction. It can even go beyond biology and apply to programming computers where one small piece of the computer code slows down the whole program. So this is all interesting stuff, I'm sure you all agree, but why am I talking about it exactly? Well, it's because how quickly hair loss drugs work is limited by the slowest step in the overall process, and that step is the hair growth cycle. Hair loss drugs actually all start working very quickly. In fact, they almost start working instantaneously, but the effect on hair growth doesn't show up quickly because the hair has to cycle, and it cycles very slowly. So, let's look at the whole process, starting from the first time you pop your very first pill of finasteride. Finasteride works by blocking the 5-AR enzyme that converts the alpha Chad hormone testosterone into the beta virgin trash hormone DHT. So the first question is, how long does it take for the first pill to start working? How long does it take for that pill of finasteride to suppress DHT levels? Well, it's actually a lot quicker than you might think. First of all, finasteride is well absorbed from the intestines, and you get a peak blood concentration of the drug in the bloodstream within 1 to 2 hours after taking that very first pill. And believe it or not, chooms, that first dose is already suppressing a lot of DHT from the very moment you first start taking it. If you look at this graph here that shows the blood concentration of DHT after taking a single dose of dutasteride or finasteride, you can see that DHT levels will fall within the very first day after you take the dose. In this graph, finasteride is represented by the open circles, and different doses of dutasteride are represented by the other icons. You can see in the graph that with finasteride, the DHT levels come back to normal in a couple of weeks after stopping finasteride. The DHT levels take longer to come back with dutasteride though, because it has a much longer half-life than finasteride, 5 weeks compared to 5 hours. But then you might be asking, but Kevin, since finasteride has a half-life of only 5 or 6 hours, how come it takes 2 weeks for the DHT levels to come back from a single dose of finasteride? The science doesn't make any sense, bro. Well, the reason for that is because both finasteride and dutasteride bind to the 5-AR enzyme irreversibly. So that means that it permanently inactivates the 5-AR enzyme. So that means that finasteride and dutasteride will literally kill the 5-AR enzyme, which is pretty badass if you think about it. If you're a 5-AR enzyme, you definitely don't want to fuck with finasteride or dutasteride. But now, I'm sure somebody's going to write in the comment section, but Kevin, how can DHT ever come back at all after you stop finasteride? You've permanently destroyed your 5-AR 5-air enzymes, so why do we have to keep on taking finasteride? That doesn't make any sense, bro. Well, that's because most enzymes in the body are being rapidly turned over, meaning old enzymes are being destroyed while new ones are being created. In the case of the type 2 5-air isoenzyme that finasteride blocks, the half-life of the turnover is about 80 hours, which is a little more than 3 days. That means that for every 3 days, about half of the type 2 5-air isoenzymes in your body are replaced by newly created enzymes. So, with that short of a half-life, pretty much all your type 2 5-air enzymes are recreated every 2 weeks, hence why it takes about 2 weeks for DHT to return to normal after stopping finasteride. With dutasteride, though, there is a much longer half-life of 5 weeks, which is why dutesteride's effects on DHT levels can last as long as 6 months. But let's get back to what happens when you first start taking finasteride. Like I said, the serum DHT levels drop immediately and stabilizes to be about 70% lower than baseline DHT levels before you started taking finasteride. We know from the classic study by Elise Olsen that by 6 weeks, finasteride lowers serum DHT levels by 70%, and this amount of lowering of DHT levels is stable over time. So long as you keep taking finasteride, your DHT levels will remain consistently low. Now, I can already tell that somebody in the comments section is going to object to what I just said and write something like, "But Kevin, you always say it's scalp DHT and not serum DHT that matters. So why did you tell us how quickly finasteride lowers scalp DHT, bro? That's what's important, right?" Well, that's true. DHT is a paracrine hormone, which means it is active where it is produced. In adults, the 5-air enzyme is located mostly in the skin, the prostate, and the hair follicles, where it produces the trash hormone DHT that causes all sorts of horrible things, like acne that makes our faces look like a cheese pizza, prostate enlargement that makes peeing feel like maxing out a barbell squat, and of course, androgenetic alopecia, which makes this happen.
And bring on the boys! Girls, that's Emma from Roscommon, but tell us, are you turned on or turned off? Shocking. Ooh.
No, I'm not.
Relax. Relax on the buttons, will you? And talk to Nadine. Nadine, what happened?
He kind of looks a bit old and he's baldy like me dad and...
Okay.
He's gonna murder me if he ever finds my channel, I think. But fortunately, every single hair follicle has its own blood supply. So what that means is that every single hair follicle is exposed to finasteride in the blood when you take a finasteride pill. So even though finasteride is typically an oral drug, it works locally on the scalp where the trash hormone DHT is located. And no, before you ask, I am not talking about the blood flow theory. I'm talking about the microvascular structure of each individual hair follicle, not the macrovascular structure of the whole scalp. Anyways, we don't have a study looking at scalp biopsies right after starting finasteride, but we do know that within a month after starting finasteride, scalp DHT has gone down 40 to 50%, and it probably happens much quicker than that even. So, after you take your very first finasteride pill, it is already working very hard to reduce the scalp DHT levels in your hair follicles, but it takes time to see results, because the rate-limiting step in treating hair loss is the hair cycle, and the hair cycle is slow. It's an oversimplification, but you can think of the hair cycle as having two major phases, the anagen growth phase, which is relatively long, and the telogen resting phase, which is relatively short. Those two cycles are the most important to remember. There's also a brief catagen phase where the anagen phase converts into the telogen phase. In androgenetic alopecia, hairs gradually become miniaturized over the course of several hair cycles. This miniaturization happens in between the telogen resting phase and the next anagen growth phase. The hair eventually miniaturizes so much that the hair follicles just grow vellus hairs, which are nearly invisible hairs that kind of look like peach fuzz, or the hair follicles just become completely empty. As androgenetic alopecia progresses, the hair cycles become shorter and shorter. The anagen growth phase shortens markedly, while the telogen resting phase actually becomes longer than normal. Eventually, after several hair cycles, the damage to the hair follicles becomes irreversible as the hair follicles die and then get replaced by scar tissue. So what you want to do with any hair loss treatment is to decrease the DHT in the hair follicles that is causing all these horrible problems. You want to do this by decreasing the number of hair cycles to prevent progression of hair loss. Ideally, you want to do this by lengthening the anagen growth phase and decreasing the telogen resting phase. You also want to stop and even reverse the miniaturization that occurs between the end of each hair cycle and the beginning of the next hair cycle. And the good news, chooms, is that is exactly what drugs like finasteride and dutasteride are designed to do. This has been clinically proven many times and shown in several studies, like this one here. In the study, finasteride increased total hair counts as well as the number of hairs in the anagen growth phase. The study concluded that finasteride promotes the conversion of hairs into the anagen growth phase. In a later study by the same author, finasteride at 1 milligram per day caused a 40% shortening of the telogen phase between the anagen growth phases and a 23% lengthening of the anagen growth phase. Now, there is more controversy about whether 5-AR blockers like finasteride actually reverse miniaturization, and I did a video that went over that topic that I'll link below, but I'll just go ahead and touch on that controversy briefly here. There are some authors who think that in people with androgenetic alopecia, there are miniaturized hairs, but there are also hairs that just stop growing because they are stuck between the telogen and the anagen phases. This is a lesser known part of the hair growth cycle that is called the kenogen phase. These researchers feel that hair loss treatments like finasteride just reboot the hair growth in those paralyzed hair follicles, and that miniaturized hairs actually can't convert back into normal sized hairs. However, more recent data suggests that miniaturized human hairs can indeed convert back to normal sized hairs with drug treatment, at least in this experiment using human hairs from subjects with androgenetic alopecia transplanted onto mice. So regardless of whether or not miniaturized hairs can turn back into normal sized hairs, there's no doubt that hair loss treatments that lower DHT levels can both further prevent hair loss and can also cause hair regrowth. So these drugs have to be either rebooting the hair cycle and hair stuck in the kenogen phase, or they are reversing miniaturization. And I think it's most likely that they cause both mechanisms of regrowth, in addition to prolonging the anagen growth phase and shortening the telogen resting phase of the hair cycle. But the most important thing to realize here, chooms, from all this information is that hair has to pass through different phases of the hair cycle for a drug like finasteride to work. And like I already said, the hair growth cycle is slow. Normally, the anagen growth phase lasts about 3 to 5 years, though it can be much shorter in people with androgenetic alopecia. The telogen resting phase lasts about 3 to 4 months. Normally, about 90% of the hair is in the anagen phase and 10% is in the telogen phase. Also, it's important to remember that unlike in mammals like mice, these phases are not synchronized at all, so the hairs in your scalp are all in different phases. Remember that at the end of the telogen phase, the hairs get shed. Normally up to about 100 hairs are shed daily. So what happens when you start finasteride? Well, since finasteride shortens the telogen resting phase, more hairs than usual will enter into the anagen growth phase, and that means more hairs than usual in the telogen resting phase will be shed. So you'll get an initial shed within a few weeks of starting finasteride or dutasteride, or even minoxidil for that matter. Any hair loss treatment that works will cause a shed, including ones that don't target DHT like minoxidil. Now, you chooms probably know what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyways because, damn it, this is important. The shed you experience when taking hair loss drugs is a good sign. It does not mean the drugs aren't working. It means the exact opposite, in fact. So, if you take treatment and you get a shed, you should rejoice because that means it's working. But at the same time, if you don't get a shed, you shouldn't panic either. The truth is that everybody sheds, but for some people, it is too minor of a shed to even notice. It may be more noticeable in some people than it is in others, but whatever the case, getting a shed shortly after starting the treatment is not a reason to stop using the drug. And I go over shedding in detail in a video that I'll link below. I'll also very briefly point out another result of the fact that more hairs than usual shed and start a new anagen phase when you start any hair loss drug treatment. What happens is that the hair cycle becomes more synchronized than usual, which means that people can get periodic sheds while they're on treatment. So if you're doing well on finasteride for 6 months and then suddenly you get a shed, don't panic. It's just the natural result of finasteride resetting your hair cycle. So shedding is actually the first sign that a hair loss drug is working, but you have to have enough hair that transitions through the telogen resting phase and back into the anagen growth phase in order to start seeing results. Since the telogen resting phase lasts about 3 months and only 10% of the hair is actually in that phase at any time normally, you'll usually have to wait a bare minimum of 3 months in order to start seeing any results at all, and the results will be only a fraction version of what you will see as you wait longer and more hair transitions through the hair cycle. Pretty much every good hair loss study lasts at least 3 months, and most last 6 months or longer. That's because the hair cycle is the rate-limiting step in determining just how quickly a drug works. So, there are several long-term studies of finasteride and dutasteride. Let me just show the results of one of them. This one right here. I'm only going to show one of them right now because they are all similar patterns of response to therapy over time, so showing any more than this would be redundant. This is a study from Good Korea that observed the response to finasteride at a dose of 1 milligram per day over the course of 5 years. As you can see from this graph, improvement in hair growth is seen after 3 months of finasteride, though the difference from baseline is slight. After 6 months, though, there is more marked improvement, but it takes up to 2 years to get a maximum effect. After 2 years, the effect is pretty stable. Now, you may be thinking, okay, that means the drug peaks after 2 years, right? Well, maybe not so. If you look at the 10-year study of finasteride that was done in Japan, there can actually be improvements in hair growth that continue to occur after 2 years of treatment. This graph from the Japanese study shows that while people with a more severe Norwood-Hamilton classification tend to have improvements that plateau after 2 years, people with less severe androgenetic alopecia can continue to improve their hair growth for up to 10 years. So this reinforces what I have always been saying on this channel. The earlier you start treatment, the better your results will be. It's much better for people to treat their hair loss early before there's any irreversible changes to the hair follicles. As you can see, there seems to be a further improvement with each hair cycle. So my takeaway from all this data is that you need to give any treatment at least 6 months before you decide that it's not working or that you need to change your dose or change drugs altogether. Whatever treatment stack you're on, though, you need to give the drug time to work. I see people who are constantly changing their stack and it only causes confusion. This isn't like taking Tylenol or aspirin where you can expect results the same day. We're talking about the hair growth cycle here, chums. So you need to give the hair time to cycle in order to determine if these drugs are actually working for you. Also, you can't panic because you have a shed. If you ever go to any hair loss community like Trestless, it is absolutely flooded by people who are claiming they're losing hair on dutasteride. Sometimes even on 2.5 milligrams of dutasteride. They'll say things like, oh my god, I'm on 2.5 milligrams of dutasteride, I'm taking male to female hormone replacement therapy and 50 milligrams of oral minoxidil, and I'm still losing my hair. But the truth is, they're full of shit. They are not losing hair on dutasteride. They are hypochondriacs who are panicking about a treatment shed because their doctors didn't bother explaining hair growth cycles to them, or they're self-medicating. The reason why you hear so many people talk about dutasteride causing hair loss is because dutasteride is the most powerful hair loss drug that has ever been invented. But because of that, it also causes the biggest shed. That's also why people claim that dutasteride made their hairline worse. It didn't. It's just that the hairline for most people is where the majority of telogen hairs are located, which is why that's usually the first thing to go in people who have male pattern baldness in the classical Norwood pattern. So, since dutasteride is very powerful, it will cause a very powerful shed of telogen hairs, which may seem like it's killing the hairline, but it's actually saving it because those telogen hairs are going to be replaced with much stronger androgen hairs and your hairline is going to look significantly better at the end of it. But that's only if you stay on treatment rather than panic and go cry on Trestless about how dutasteride didn't work for you because you're not patient enough. Look, chums, I get it. I've been down that path too. It's very easy to start believing that your hair is getting worse when it's really not. You either are not giving the treatment enough time, or you're going through a shed, or another likelihood is you are not a good judge of your own progress. The fact is that self-assessments are not very reliable. Everybody, including people who don't have androgenetic alopecia, will have days when their hair looks worse than on other days. So, if you really want to know if a treatment is working for you, what you actually need to do is have a medical professional follow you to objectively evaluate your progress. They can do this by using an instrument like a phototrichogram that can give you an objective measurement of just how much hair you've lost or gained with each appointment. It's easy to become paranoid that your treatment is not working and give up too soon, but the fact is that these treatments work for pretty much everybody. It's just that many people don't have the balls to push through a shed and they end up giving up way too soon, which is insanely stupid because just think about this for a moment, tunes. If you're scared of a treatment giving you a shed, then what the hell do you think is going to happen if you don't use treatment? You're still going to shed, of course, but the hair is never going to come back. So, You have to make a choice here. Either take a treatment, shed and save your hair, or don't take a treatment, shed and lose your hair forever. But since you're going to be shedding either way, you might as well just suck it up and just deal with the damn shed. Giving up on a treatment or needlessly changing a treatment protocol because of a shed is probably the most common and stupid mistake I see novice hair loss witchers make. If the shed really bothers you though, then what you can do is use hair fibers. Hair fibers are basically just like makeup for your hair. They attach to your existing hair follicles to make them look thicker, so if your hair looks thin because of a shed, you can easily use hair fibers to make them look thicker. For the crown, use something like Kabuki or Topic, but for the hairline, use Derm Match because Kabuki and Topic look too dirty and powdery on the hairline. They basically look like hell and they'll look really embarrassing if you try it out. So please, chums, do you want to save your hair or don't you? If you do, then you need to show some cojones and be patient. Just pop that finasteride daily like an aspirin and forget about it. If you're on treatment, then you can assume that your treatment is working. Just because the changes are too gradual to notice on a daily basis does not change the fact that finasteride and dutasteride are altering the hair growth cycle in a way that favors hair regrowth. But that cycle takes time. So you should push through because finasteride is a drug that rewards the patient and intrepid. The querulous and the milksop weaklings, though, are not worthy of finasteride's greatness. So if you don't have the balls, grit, and guts to use it, then don't. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you for watching. God bless.